15 tubes. We take 5 that have 10 milliliters, 5 that have 1 milliliter, and 5 that have 0.1 milliliters in terms of a solution. We put them in an incubator. So let's say Monday we sample. Tuesday, 24 hours later, we come back and look at it, see if it's cloudy or if it's got hot tubes. Wednesday, if it's not hot, but it's cloudy, we come back on Wednesday, 48 hours later. If it's still cloudy or there's a little bubble, then we switch to Thursday in a confirming test called BGB. It's brilliant green bile. It's sort of a green sample. We put that water into that BGB for 24 hours and again for 48 hours. The point is, you take a test on Monday, as this thing sort of goes through the confirmation process, you might not know for 2 or even 4 days later that you actually had a violation on that day. So we're doing this every day, and so you're walking down a path. So when you take the samples on Monday, you may not know till Wednesday that you have a violation. But by Wednesday, you might have a violation on Tuesday and Wednesday because you haven't solved the problem. Our problem is this. In the summer, right now, in our low flow period, we have very low flow, we have hot weather, and after our water leaves our clarifiers, goes into this filter influence station, it comes under pipe here, and comes into a long channel right here. It's about 6 feet wide and about 6 feet deep. The first part of the channel is a flocculation basin where we add a polymer to try and grab the particles. Well, this channel was built for 3 million gallons a day. Right now we're only running 1.5 million. And so the water flow through that channel is very low and very slow. And so the polymer particles settle out. So we think when we have a high winter flow and we push a lot of solids to the plant, that a lot of them end up just settling out in this channel before they end up in the filters and before they end up in the UV channel here. Normally we sample for our disinfection right at the end of the UV channel here. We have 5 UV banks. We normally, during the winter and lower flow periods, we're only running 2, maybe 3 banks. We've been running 5 banks pretty much the most of the summer. On Monday, last week, we took the samples, we put them in the incubator. On Tuesday, it's been a while since we've cleaned that channel. The collection system came down. They cleaned this channel with the gap vacs. And as they cleaned it, they stirred up the bottom, and we got a ton of black gunk and bacteria, bryozoa, and algae growth is growing in there. We don't let any of that out to the river. It goes through the UV channel, dumps into the chlorine contact chamber where we store it temporarily. So we cleaned this channel, and there's a pipe that leaves this channel, goes down underground. It's 24-inch diameter. It's like a U. A lot of gunk settles down on the bottom of that. So we cleaned all that, flushed out the UV channel, captured the water, sent it back to the beginning of the plant. That was on Tuesday. We took the sample Monday, turned up hot. Tuesday turned up hot. Wednesday turned up hot. Thursday, we've had a small hot tube in the previous week. Thursday, we put the chlorine contact chamber online. Since Thursday of last week, we've been running the plant 12-hour shifts. Friday, putting the crew in 12 on, 12 off, because our chlorine system is not automatic. And so since Friday, Saturday, then into Sunday today, crews are working 12 on, 12 off, running the chlorine contact chamber. Friday, Saturday, Sunday, and Monday, all 4 of those samples are fine. But we did violate because in this period of when the samples were taken and before we got the chlorine in line, we had 4 samples that were above the 2, but not above the 23 or the 240. So we had 4 samples that were at 4. Well, having 4 samples 4 out of 7 puts us above our 2.2 limit. We're required to report those violations to the regional board when they happen. We've done that. We've also kept our chlorine contact chamber online through getting clear. Long term, we're going to have to do a couple of things. One, we're going to have to clean these channels, these pipes, this UV system much more frequently than we are because of the low flow. The water flow is low, the temperature is hot. I got a couple of pictures here. This is our equalization basins. This is water that is stored to take out the peaks of a normal 24-hour day flow. That water's been in that equalization basin for about less than 24 hours, and you can see the amount of algae that's growing on it. Well, that water goes right back through the filters, so that's gunk that the filters have to basically filter out. So we're going to have to clean filters. We're going to have to clean these filters. We're going to have to clean these equalization basins. We're going to have to clean this channel and the UV channel much more frequently. And we've talked about it for quite a while. We need to put up covers and shade over them to cut down on the amount of sun and the algae growth that we're getting. It's not going to solve the problem, but it really will cut down on the amount of bloom that we get. And I think we're going to do all this and explore covering all this with solar panels so that we get the shade, but we also get some power while we're doing it. But we did have a violation. We're now back in the clear with the contact chamber online. But we've only solved the day's problem. We haven't solved the long-term problem. So that's where we are with our violation. We're going to get a letter from the state. We have a pretty clear record over the last 5 years. We've only had a couple of some very minor spills, very minor violations, but it is something we have to report and we have to deal with.
Jeff,
Good.
Jeff, you believe cleaning those corridors on a more frequent basis should resolve the issue?
Well, in an ideal world, we would have pathways in the plant that were smaller size that we could, use half the channel. That's not the way the plant was built. The plant was built with 3 million gallons a day, where now you're running 1.5 million. The velocity through that channel, I mean, you can barely see the water moving if you stand above that grade. So the solution is to clean it for the stuff that drops out. We're not going to be able to get the stuff from dropping out to not drop out because we're required to put in a polymer to flocculate the particles. And because it's going so slow, they're just going to settle to the bottom. So it is going to be a maintenance thing. It's going to be more often than we would like. But then that just becomes part of the maintenance regime that we have to follow. I really don't see, this is water that's been through the treatment system but hasn't been filtered yet. So yeah, it's pretty clean, but there's still a bunch of junk in it, plastics. I mean, there's a lot of small stuff, and as that small stuff settles, it grabs algae to the bottom, and then you get algae growing in this. I mean, this is basically a small river with plenty of nutrients and plenty of sun. And so we're getting algae growth. There's an algae that comes with treatment plants. It's called Bryozoa. It's a pretty hardy algae. It can grow in dark areas. It doesn't need light, but it likes light. If you try and shock it with chlorine and kill it, it just sort of shrinks back up in itself and waits till the water conditions change. And so it's pretty hard to get out. The way they clean this channel is there's metal grates, and they pull the metal grates and go in there with a hose and basically water blast it off, and it all goes into this chlorine chamber that we use as temporary holding. We don't let it go through and get out and go out into the river here. We pump it all back to the headworks and start over. So, but it's just a higher maintenance thing than we've been maybe given it.
The likelihood that the factors leading up to this are going to continue: ultra-flow systems, low-flow systems, water conservation, etc. Looking at the long term, is this going to be something that we have to, obviously you guys are professionals, okay? You're going to have to look at this more in depth as to a long-term solution to handle this into the next decade?
Yeah, we want to cover it. We have a couple of things. One, I think we need to cover with shade and cut down on the light. I mean, you see from these sort of pictures, when we have water just standing in the plant, this algae didn't come through the plant and end up here. This is algae that's grown in that equalization basin in less than 24 hours. So we need to get some shade. The second part is we talked about this channel is a square rectangle. And so when we want to clean it, I mean, you gotta clean the whole bottom of the rectangle, and so we're talking about coming up with a configuration where maybe we change the bottom of it to have a V, so that it's easier to hose out and clean, so that when we do have to do maintenance on it, it's much more, it's quicker, and it's much more thorough in being able to wash out the algae and the black gunk that's on the bottom of the ditch. So we're looking at 2 or 3 solutions. Having the chlorine system available to be automatic, so that we can, when we're on 5 banks and we start to see, you know, little rises, we can, you know, jump the chlorine system online quicker rather than sort of a manual system. Right now, we're running it on manual, so they're watching the flow of the plant and then adjusting the chlorine to get the desired concentration they want. And so it's manually intensive, and it's a little bit sort of clunky in terms of responsiveness.
You know, looking at this thing holistically, again, you guys are professionals, you guys are the engineers, you guys have been most familiar with the system. You know, we've got a few violations now, obviously you're gonna have to entertain some discussion with Robert about, you know, the whole thing. I think it'd be great to approach the board in the upcoming months as to, you know, how this is all being, for lack of words, digested.
Okay.
And, you know, report back to us as to, you know, what are some of the foreseeable intermediate term solutions, as well as, you know, long-term types of assessments that need to be done.
Okay.
Mr. Green?
I agree with Director Kaiser that we are running into problems because we're running at a level which is less than what it was designed for, right? There's got to be an answer which is more easily, let's say, implemented, that would make this go away. Does that mean restricting the flow by reducing the size of a passageway so that the velocity goes up? Is that a possibility?
We have 2 ditches. They're identical. We have 2 clarifiers that are identical. Ron and I have had this conversation about, you know, could we shut down half the plant? Could we shut down a ditch, and could we shut down a clarifier? And would the resulting hydraulic flow and velocity go through the plant faster and be more efficient on the overall processing system? And there's some truth to that. The problem is that every winter, when our flow goes up, then we need to put the other half back online, and in order to put the other half back online, you need the population of the good bugs to run the second half of the plant. And so it takes some time when you go from one ditch to turning the second ditch on, to getting the population in the 2 clarifiers and the 2 ditches up to enough to make it run efficiently. In an ideal world, and large plants have much more flexibility, because they'll have 20 ditches and 20 clarifiers, so they can ramp up, you know, and go, you know, 3, 4, 5 ditches as they need to be. This is a problem that is typical of small plants, where you're built for one condition, and maybe through winter seasons or annual flow seasons, you have a variety of flow conditions. And so this is a typical problem that we deal with. We can't just shut down half the plant during the summer when we could only run half the plant, because we need the population of the bugs, you know, by about October 1st to October 15th, somewhere around there. And it takes a while for the bugs to reproduce to build that population. So we could shut down in April, but then we'd have to be back up and populated and started by October. And what would that sort of wave of change do to the overall operating conditions of the plant? And right now, we don't think we can shut down half the plant for the summer and solve some of these problems, and then still be in a position for the winter to have the population in place when we need it for the cold weather and the higher flow.
Well, we've never tried.
No, we've never tried it, because I'm not thinking it would work.
Okay.
And I'm not comfortable shutting down half the plant for the summer and going, hey, let's flip the switch back on and hope it's all back up and good by November 1st. And I don't think that's the right move. and we're right on that bubble of being in a position to try. Now, down the road, if we can get our I&I under control, so that when we do have winters, we don't have these huge winter flows, maybe there's some point down the road in the future where maybe that works. But right now, I think it's too risky to shut down for the summer and still be in a position to be back up and going by
But
winter.
there is a possibility that we can solve this.
We're looking at all of the options,
Okay.
but we're kind of stuck because we can't shut down. I don't think we can shut down half the plant right now.
Fair.
Jeff, could you put the pointer back up there on that ramp at the beginning of the, yeah, that one? That's fixed, and because it's fixed, the low flow causes the water to go at a very slow speed. Can you change the angle so that it runs faster?
We're gonna look at that ditch in particular. That's where we were talking about making it into a V. That's something to work on. But we're gonna need some other engineers to come in and help us think through some of the problems. The problem is the pipe from the filters comes across here. It's a 24-inch diameter pipe, and then it outlets into this 6x6 channel box. And you can stand over the grate and look down at it, and darn near can't see the water move because it's so still and it's moving so slow. But we've already added the flock to it, so anything that's in there just sinks to the bottom instantly. So, I mean, this is, this sort of racetrack portion is where we think our problem is.
I don't think so. If it's moving so slow and it's causing the flock to drop out.
And when they cleaned it on Tuesday, I mean, it was black. And so, something's down there that's going septic, going, whatever, poisonous. And then when it goes through the 5 UV banks, the UV just isn't strong enough to kill whatever's going in. That's what we think is happening.
Mr. Curtis, was there a schedule for cleaning that particular channel and in that particular thing? I mean, the drought's gone on for 4 years, so we had a pretty low flow for 4 years.
We look back over the flow, and we look back over the back T tests at this time of year. We looked at July the last 4 years. The flow has been comparable. We have seen the rise in some of the back T increases in July in past years, but we never had a violation in the past years. We cleaned that channel in May, just less than 3 months ago. And we've been doing that same pattern before. For some reason, the same pattern that we followed for the past 3 years wasn't enough this year. We saw the same general pattern, the same general flows, the same general increases in back T, but we never got to 5 banks and we're still popping over the limit in previous years. So something was stronger this year. The only thing that was different this year is we think that because of the higher winter flows, that somehow more solids were in our system and built up faster, in that channel.
Mr. Reed?
Could we pin you down to a time when you might know more and you can report back that you found a method or you were working on?
Well, we'll report at the next board meeting because we're not going to just shut off the chlorine system. What we're going to do is we're going to keep the chlorine system on as a belt and suspenders. And we're going to start shutting down the UV banks one at a time. And then we test both at the end of the UV banks and the end of the chlorine system and see that if what we did cleaning-wise would be clean enough to be disinfected by 4 banks of UV or 3 banks of UV. And so we're going to sort of back off the UV and see if what we've done would make the UV still provide us the adequate
So you're
disinfectant.
saying by our next meeting, you will have some more information?
This stuff is changing almost daily, and I'll probably know in a week or two whether or not the cleaning resulted in clean enough for UV to actually provide this.
Gotcha.
Thank you. Jeff, the lab sample those samples, correct? I mean, they did the specimens and all that.
Yeah, we do all this, we do all the back T in-house.
Did they happen to test for any other types of, constituents, inorganics, or any other chemicals? Because like Jack was talking about, this popping up now, we've had the drought for quite a few years now, and we've had odd times of the year, et cetera. And I'm just kind of curious if there's anything that they might have tested for that would have shown something out of the end, something unusual that could have been introduced into our system.
I don't have information on whether we would test for specific things. We have seen more bryozoa this year. We have seen
Is that
more.
a solid or something?
No, it's an algae type. It's kind of like a, it's not a hard shell, but if you think like a mussel, that when it gets stressed, the mussel that pulls back inside the shell, that's what the bryozoa does. It pulls back inside itself. We have seen more bryozoa this year. We did see back T pops last year. We just didn't get 4 in 7 days. So we might get 1 or 2, and it goes clean for a few days.
I'm just, again, I'm just speculating that there may have been some contributing types of,
There is the risk, and we did a little bit of analysis. It wasn't completely conclusive as to whether or not maybe our glass wasn't clean. And so there was some indication that potentially there was some contamination in some of the test tubes, but we couldn't pin it down exactly. But we looked at the test tubes to see if our testing procedures and our test tubes themselves were potentially part of the problem. They might be, so we're making sure that our test tube cleaning process is fine.
if we basically entertain full QA/QC, that'll take care of that. But again, I'm just wondering if there was something that was introduced into our system somehow that,
This is one of the questions that sort of dances around treatment plants, and that is, did somebody dump something on us that causes us a problem? And I have no doubt that it occurs from time to time, but it's almost nearly impossible to figure out. And the reason is the plant has about a 40-hour detention time from the time a gallon of water comes in the influent side to the time it goes out to the river. When water hits this influent, pump station here, goes through all this system and gets to the outlet here, literally it's almost 2 days time. So by the time we see something somewhere in the system, it's been thoroughly mixed and may have been in the system for 2 days. And then trying to figure out where that came from up in the collection system that's 120 miles long is nearly impossible to find. Do we see anomalies that are strange in terms of our populations in our, we look at the type and constituent of bacteria in the clarifiers, and we see changes and differences, and we can't figure it out, but some days there's more long chain bacteria and fewer shorter chain bacteria. We went through an incident last summer where we weren't getting the same population of bacteria in the clarifiers, and as it sinks, it wasn't catching all the stuff to the bottom. But where did that come from and what was it? It's nearly impossible to find.
Curtis? Do we test the loads that the,
Yes.
some the pumpers bring
Yes.
in?
Yes.
So we know what that is?
Yes.
Does that could come from, especially those small plants, that something like that could come in from those,
Well,
from the regional?
Quite frankly, I'm a little less concerned about septic loads than I am about individual loads at someone's house. There is nothing to stop somebody from dumping 20 gallons, 40 gallons, something into their house, in their garage, in their shop. It's impossible to even know that it was dumped, because you dump 50 gallons of water somewhere in the system of something pretty harsh, we can't figure out where it came from. We know certain things. We know when Dairy Farmers America cleans out their coffee system, because we get a really black coffee smelling load at the Orchard pump station. But literally, other than that, we can't tell if somebody dumped something at, a manhole on Creek or a manhole up in Miners Oaks somewhere, or if they got to clean out in their backyard. We would never find it. And that's a scary thing, because if somebody puts a poison in the system and kills those bugs,
We're toast.
then we're in trouble. Now we got to go to another plant somewhere else, get a couple of loads of bugs, and rebuild the population. It's a pretty I mean, we're farming these bugs, and they're critical to us, but we're kind of at the mercy of people doing something stupid.
Is there a potential fine for this particular?
Yes. I would estimate less than $10,000.
Jeff, how long do we anticipate having to introduce that chlorine in participant?
I think we're gonna run the chlorine through about Wednesday this week. We're gonna back off on the UV system first and see if 4 banks, 3 banks is providing us the disinfection we need. If that is the case, then we'll shut down the chlorine. We think Wednesday or Thursday we'll be able to do that.
Wes?
Do you think that the cleaning in May of that system was as aggressive as what you had to go through was reasonable?
It's hard to tell. I think we've had an opportunity to see, you know, May to end of July, how much, you know, stuff is collected and how bad it can be. And so, you know, we're going to talk about doing it every other month or every month as we come out of a winter into a summer period, so that we don't get, you know, a solids accumulation during the summer. That's just going to have to be one of the maintenance cycles that comes up now.
Is there some way, after it's been cleaned, it can be checked to make sure that it's clean?
We can see it.
You can see it.
What we do is when we want to clean this system, we shut down these pumps. And the plant continues to work treatment-wise, but when you shut down these pumps, the water automatically sort of backs up and fills these 3 equalization basins. So we can shut down this system, clean it, look at it, inspect it, do things to it, save all that dirty water, then start the pumps back up and push water back through the system that you know that has been cleaned, and then take the dirty water and recycle it. So we can do that. Every time you turn off filters, though, I mean, this is part of the problem with the plant. They're big, tall sand filters, and water bubbles up through them and catches pollutants. And every time you turn off the water to them, the sand sort of settles back down, and so you got to restart them and refloat the sand. And every time you change the velocity of the water through those sand filters, you upset the sand matrix. It's all sort of floating there, catching things. And if you turn it on and turn it off every day, you're not going to get good filter performance out of the sand. So the goal is to not turn them off and to run them at constant, steady speed, day in and day out. That's what these big basins work. So as the flow comes through the plant that exceeds what we've set those filter pumps to run at, that extra water goes off to the side. When the flow drops down at midnight, 2, 3, 4 in the morning, that flow comes back in, and the filters are hopefully running at, you know, a constant speed. Now there is a little bit of variation each day. Usually about 6 a.m., 5, 6, 7 a.m., we run out of water in these basins, and the flush out of the system isn't there yet. And so usually at 6 a.m.-ish, we have to speed the filters down a little bit because we're not getting enough water. And so it's a balancing act to keep those filters running smooth, but keeping that storage going every day. We can clean these monthly, we can clean them weekly. At some point you start to upset the sand filter balance and mess with the thing that's catching all the pollutants.
Mr. Green?
Jeff, we've had a number of hot weather spells during this season where the temperature's gone into the hundreds. What's the effect of variations in outside temperature when we get 100 degrees for a day or 2?
Literally, when we get temperatures that increase for a day or 2, it doesn't affect us. When you think about water that goes down your drain, it goes down into the system that's underground. And the ground and the pipes and is a much more stable heat sink, especially 6, 8, 10 feet down. So we see about a 10 degrees Celsius change from winter to summer. But on summer to summer days, we don't see very much variation in the water flow. Yes, there's a little bit. If we get 405 degree days in a row up here in the valley, we're gonna see that temperature rise, but it's gonna be on the order of a couple of tenths degrees Celsius. It's not gonna go from 85 to 105.
But that change in temperature, how does that affect the chemistry?
Well, as the water's warmer, these bugs are more active.
Right?
And so we adjust the concentration of the bugs in the solution, you know, how many bugs per gallon, so to speak. We call milligrams per liter or mixed liquor concentrations. But if you think about, you know, if you had 10 bugs per gallon or 20 bugs per gallon, you know, if the water's warmer, the bugs are gonna do more work, eating more of the pollutants. And so we have to watch the temperature and the population concentration in these ditches to keep, you know, that population where it needs to be. For every 5 degrees change in water temperature, the bugs double their activity level. So as they start to get more active in the summer, they reproduce, they do a better job chewing up the pollutants. Then we need to take them out of the system, they go through the bottom of the clarifier, we take them through our belt press and end up composting them. So we're constantly adjusting those bugs and watching the temperature and watching the performance. You know, this is not a just flip the switch on and the system works fine day in and day out. It takes a lot of art adjusting these things. It's not a pure science. And now we found out that cleaning that ditch every 3 months worked last year and the year before and the year before, didn't work this year. And that's why we got a back teapot.
Thank you.
All right, thanks, Jeff. I think if you got any further questions, we can either give Jeff a call or we can set something up for another meeting. When we get our information next month. Move on to item 18, I guess we had no committee meetings, so we have no committee reports. Reports on meetings, seminars, conferences attended.
What about, anybody have any information, if interest that they brought back access?
I haven't seen any reports yet, Mr. Green, so.
Agriculture line in.
Unless somebody's got something just off the top of their head.
Well, I was just looking for comments.
I'll comment on the CSRMA risk management portion, which I thought was the best part of that whole trip. Very informative, very worthwhile. Really good.
Mr. Ulrich, did you have anything in particular
From
from past?
conference?
Yeah.
In addition to that, Dr. Burke's comments about the risk management, which I found to be outstanding as well. I thought the keynote address by the state controller was really excellent. And her points